Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. Brian and I will be discussing calculating labor burden. So as many of you know, labor burden is a little bit more than, or your labor cost is a little bit more than just what you pay your electricians. You also need to consider the additional costs and a few other elements that go into calculating the overall labor burden. And so hold tight. Brian's going to get to that in a second. If you're on YouTube with us, you can ask us questions over on the right. And there's a chat bar over there that we'll be watching and jumping into once in a while and making sure that we're discussing what you're interested in or you want more detail on. I think that's well. One more thing, if you'd be so kind as to like and subscribe to our channel, like this video and subscribe, it helps us continue to build our channel and get out in front of more people. So, hey, Brian, you ready to roll into our labor burden calculation?
Yeah. Good morning. Do you see the PowerPoint?
I see the PowerPoint.
And you see your picture and then mine?
I do.
Okay, good. All right. So as Derek was saying, we want to talk about labor burden today. When you calculate the cost of your labor, it's more than just, first of all, knowing how many hours it's going to take. That's what electrical bid manager helps. One of the things that electrical bid manager helps you with, but it's also knowing your cost of labor. So it begins with the hourly pay rate, how much you pay the electricians and any of the other field employees per hour, typically. And typically, most uh, electrical contractors divide their crews into different categories, like journeyman, apprentice, helper, foreman, etc. You know, in EBM, where you see that, just flip over there real quick, is on the setup here. Whoops, wrong button. Sorry. I wanted the hourly rate. So these are some examples of different categories of labor. I'm going to switch back to a little more of a simple one. But in this example here, we've got half of our hour split between journeymen, helpers, and at this point, this setup doesn't have any working foremen. So what it produces is a weighted average. If you look down here at the bottom, this hourly rate, and we're going to talk about how we add in burden to that, but it's a weighted average of the percentage of hours that are allocated to the different categories. So it doesn't matter whether the job's going to take 10 hours, 100 hours, or 10,000 hours. We're just indicating that we're going to split the hours 50-50. Okay, so one of the, I don't say misconceptions, but I guess definitions or terminology that's a little bit misused or misunderstood in the industry is labor burden. It's not overhead. Some people call it overhead. Overhead is the cost of running the business, your recurring costs for paying your lease or your rent on your building, your salaried employees, your utilities, your truck payments, that kind of thing. Burden, one of the things that's included in your labor burden is your payroll taxes that are paid by the employer. In most states, in every state, we have federal payroll taxes. And in most states, there's also a portion that's paid to the state. So that right off the top is part of your labor burden. On top of that, you've got workers' comp. That can range from 2 to 5%. That's your workers' compensation insurance. It's tied directly to your payroll. Now, I know one of the things here that maybe as an estimator you haven't had the access to this information, but you need it for estimating. You know, what good does it do to put together an estimate and you've put lots of time and effort into it, and the program's told you how much material it's going to take and how much labor it's going to take in hours if you don't have a good solid foundation for your hourly cost. So in addition to your payroll taxes, you also need to add in workers' comp. And then the other one is general liability insurance, which typically runs 4 to 6%. Now, again, I wouldn't recommend you use these numbers as for your company. You need to check them, but I'm just giving you some general ranges as to what you would expect your general liability insurance and your workers' comp. Payroll taxes for Federal are about, I think, 7.65 or 8% roughly. State payroll taxes can vary. That's probably going to add another 2 or 3% to the formula. I'm going to show you a little spreadsheet in a minute that helps you add all these up. Benefits is the hardest one to calculate. You know, if the company doesn't pay any health insurance, then that's not part of your benefits. Health insurance could be partially paid by the company. That's probably more common. Sometimes it's paid entirely by the company. So health insurance is a potentially big part of the benefits. Holiday pay, sick pay, vacation pay, any of that is included. So you got to go look at some averages. How many days a year are you paying for sick pay? How many days a year are you paying for holiday or vacation pay? And come up with an idea of what that adds to the cost of your labor as a percentage. Any other contributions would be included too. If there's a 401k paid by the company, that's all part of your labor burden. It could literally be zero, maybe as high as 25, 30%. This is going to be the one that's probably the hardest to nail down. If you're going to need to work with either your accountant or your bookkeeper um, to get this information if you don't already have it. Now, when we talk about labor hours, what's included, what isn't? What what I like to call general non-productive, that's already included. So that's the time, and it's we allocate about 30% of that the hours on a job to general non-productive. So if the program says it's going to take 1,000 hours for the job, then we've already allocated 300 hours for non-productive, general non-productive, and that's things like uh, project managers. Uh, Although this could fall into two different categories. If your project manager's time is tracked to the job, costed to the job, then uh, that's not included. Another thing that's not included is travel time, supervision, safety meetings. Those kind of things are not included in the general non-productive labor. So let me just flip back to EBM. So for those of you who are familiar with what we're talking about, so there's a category here for non-productive. Again, the direct hours in this little example, 1,254, that's already allocated 30% for general non-productive. Um, Setup time, cleanup, uh, breaks, correcting mistakes, all those kind of things are already included. You would add non-productive time for the things we were just talking about, travel time, uh, if there's going to be additional safety meetings, those kind of things that are not typically not typical for your jobs. So let me just show you this again. This is the screen in EBM that you see. I'm going to flip back to EBM so you see it again. So in the job, when you click on the hourly rate here, this is where we've split up the job. I'm going to do it. There we go. 50-50 between journeyman and helper. These are our base rates. That's what they see on their paycheck. And then the burden in this example I've added is 35%. So let's say you go through the math of calculating the labor burden here. So in this example, again, 7.65%, that's the federal, that's for everybody. State payroll taxes, again, you need to find out what your rate is. It's, I think, always lower than the federal, but it could be, up to 5%. Workers' comp, again, we're just putting in 4%, and general liability, we're putting in 5%, and 22% for benefits. So in this example, our labor burden is 43.65. So if I put that into EBM here, this is where it goes. Whoops. Got my numlock key in the wrong position there. Here we go. 43.65. So now our average hourly cost is this $35.91. So it went up a little bit because I increased the labor burden. And again, back from this spreadsheet, what's included there are federal payroll taxes, state payroll taxes that are the employer's portion, workers' comp, general liability, and benefits. So if this is something you haven't looked into, again, I really strongly recommend you dig into it a little bit because it's a big part of your estimate. Your labor burden could be 20%, it could be 60 or 70%. The main variable here is going to be the benefits that are paid by the company. Like I said, that could be anywhere from 0 to 30% or even possibly more. These other ones are going to be in a little more narrow range. Your workers' comp, your general liability, and your federal payroll taxes, those are a little easier to nail down. They're not as variable.
I think I'm going to share that spreadsheet.
Okay. You've got it on your system? Yep. Yeah, that's a handy little tool to get a handle on this. And one of the reasons I wanted to do a webinar on this is, every time I train a new employee, this is one of the things we start with is trying to put some numbers in for not only the hourly rates that they're paying their different employees, but the labor burden. And a lot of the time, the person I'm training hasn't even thought about that yet. But again, we can help you with the material costs, we can help you with the labor hours, but everybody's going to have a different hourly rate that their cost, including the burden. So it's really something you need to look at an individual basis. If you happen to be a union contractor, it's a little easier to nail down because they tell you what the benefit package is. And then you can easily get the information you need on the federal and state payroll taxes and the workers' comp and general liability. But if you haven't looked at your benefits portion of your labor burden, that's going to be something you really need to take a look at. Maybe just flip back a little bit for a second back to EBM. When you're in a job in EBM, you can adjust the numbers here. When you set up your system, we have default settings. So what you do is you go to settings, default settings, job, commercial. And just a little footnote, you need to have administrator status in EBM to get into this setup part. So obviously you don't want anybody being able to change this if you're on a multi-user system. But here's the direct labor rates. So whatever you set up here is what becomes a template or becomes the default for every new job you create from that point on. And then when you're in the job, you can either change to a different setup. You could have maybe one for residential, commercial, industrial, prevailing wage, or you can just change the numbers on the little spreadsheet here.
All right.
I think that's about all I've got, Derek. Any questions that have?
Just some access, how to get to it, and
I guess I just covered that.
Yeah,
So,
I know we have a non-productive labor tab on the sheet, but we didn't really finish it. So could kind of do what you wish with that tab, or maybe we'll get to finishing and adding more to it.
On the job totals, you mean?
Oh, no, on the spreadsheet, the Google spreadsheet that you shared.
The Google.
Yeah, that screenshot. The labor burden calculator.
Oh, come on.
Where's
this one?
Yeah. That's remember, that's a Google.
This is, okay, but it's not non-productive labor.
Correct.
Okay,
That is labor burden calculation, but we had added a tab. I think we were going to add some extra tools to this sheet, but we didn't finish it. The extra tab is called non-productive labor. I was just mentioning it. It's not important.
Sometimes it's not real straightforward separating non-productive labor from uh, additional non-productive labor, if you will, from the non-productive labor that's already included. Like I mentioned at the beginning, when the program tells you that the job is going to take X hours, 1,000 hours or whatever, it's already allocated 30% to the normal non-productive things that you have to, that are just part of the job: the setup, the cleanup, the breaks, fixing mistakes, interruptions, all those kind of things are already included. Uh, the other non-productive labor in EBM, I'll just flip back there real quick. Yeah. You're seeing my EBM screen, right, Derek?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the other category for non-productive is this one. Again, if you have to add for driving time, that's probably a really good example, because if you're not paying the electricians to drive to or from the job site, which is probably pretty typical, then you don't add here. You would add driving time if you are paying the electricians to drive to or from the job site. Uh, that might occur more commonly if you're working outside of your normal area, or if you just have a situation where you pay them, once or twice a week to come into the shop, and that time, from that time that they drive to the job, that's at additional time. So you don't normally add for driving time, again, unless you're maybe outside of your normal area. Project managers are a little bit of a 50-50 kind of a thing. Some companies look at the project manager as part of their actual overhead. They're going to get paid their salary regardless of whether they're running one job or 10 jobs. If your company looks at the project manager as part of the actual direct cost of the job, then you would put some hours in here to cover that. So again, normal non-productive time is already included. You only add for additional time over and above a typical job.
We have a prevailing wage question.
Okay. For some reason, I'm not seeing that screen, Derek. What is it?
It's off to the right side in the
Yeah,
bottom of.
I don't think I set it up right.
Well, I'm sharing it on our restream.
I don't see the restream. That's, I guess, where I messed up.
Oh, yeah. Could we look at an example using prevailing wage and how it affects benefits, as some packages have it included?
Sure. We actually have an example of prevailing wage in EBM. You're still seeing my EBM screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. So when you're in this labor rate spreadsheet, if you will, there's a button down at the bottom that says select another set of rates. So I've got an example of a prevailing wage or a union crew. Again, the categories could be the same as what you normally use to bid, but the base rate would be the prevailing wage for your area, for your trades that you're looking at. And again, that they typically tell you what the burden is. Now that burden, as part of the prevailing wage, is typically not going to include workers' comp or general liability. It would include benefits. And again, that may be different from one area to another. When they tell you, when you go to look up your prevailing wage for your area, for the job you're bidding, you got to look at specifically what's included and what isn't included. But it's usually based on the union rates and the union benefits that are typical for that area. So that's usually what you want to kind of expect, is that the prevailing wage will be roughly what the union rates are for those different categories, including benefits and all that. So typically the burden is going to be higher on a prevailing wage job, because typically the union benefits are higher than non-union benefits. I hope that answers the question.
Yep. Alan, feel free to ask some follow-up questions if you like. Brian's also available for training if you want more in-depth conversations and help with anything labor burden related.
Sure. I have that discussion almost on a daily basis with people, and it's interesting to see how much they have given it thought to, or not given thought to it. But that was part of the reason to do this webinar was that I think a lot of people haven't given thought to it, and you got to be reminded to update it periodically, maybe once a quarter, certainly no less than twice a year. You want to review
Mhm.
your labor cost and your labor burden because those things change, not just the hourly rate, but the burden factors can change too.
Especially benefits.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's see. We have a couple things, but if you have any more questions, we'll be here for another minute or so. We're going to be in San Diego, California, in a couple weeks at the NICA convention. So if you're in town, come by and see us.
So that started on the 29th.
I think the 29th. I think it's Saturday or Sunday of that
Starts on
weekend.
Sunday.
Right. The convention does, at least.
Yep.
And we'll have a new thing or two to share with you if you come by the booth, and feel free to ask any questions or have a little mini training session with Brian while you're there. And then what is it, 2-3 weeks later, we'll be in Tampa
Yep, for the
for the
IEC.
IEC Spark convention. And those are kind of the two big things that we have coming up right now. And of course, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can keep getting updates on when we release new videos, and help us grow the channel. We just ticked over 4,000 subscribers, which I think this time last year we were at 3,000. So it's a pretty good increase. Now we're gunning for 5,000. All right. Let's see. No more questions. All right. Well, thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. I can't believe we haven't covered this in a webinar yet. We keep uncovering hidden gems, and we need more of these,
I
because
think
we
we
had
touched on it, but we haven't really dug into it, so that's
right.
good. Yeah.
I think you're right. And all right. Well, thank you, and we'll see you next month.
All righty. Thank you.